Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here to do kind of a movie chat reactions video to the film adaptation of To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. The movie was recently released on Netflix, and I loved it, so I'm gonna try and speak a little bit more coherently about why this is such a fantastic movie and why I really recommend you guys watch it. So first off, and I think one of the most important things about the movie that I really loved was how good the acting was, especially the leads Lena Condor and Noah Centineo. Is that how you say his name? I should have looked that up. But they did such a fantastic job. It felt very, I feel like the style of their performance felt a little different to a lot of other movies I've seen, but it felt very real and very natural, and they kind of, they stumbled over their words sometimes because that's what you do in a normal conversation, and they were sometimes really awkward because, again, that's how you are normally when you're interacting with somebody that you're not 100% comfortable with. And I just think that they really captured, the tone and the feeling of the characters from the book. I do want to reference the casting really quickly because there was some discussion and some controversy because I don't believe that any of the leads are actually Korean American, and there was a lot of discussion about whether this was still a good cast because, it's kind of, some people felt like it was saying Asian identities are interchangeable, whereas in the book she's very clearly stated to be Korean American. So that is something to just kind of make yourself aware of. I also read something from Jenny Han recently that said she went with the only film production company that was not going to whitewash Lara Jean and just completely remove all of her Asian American heritage, which is horrifying that there was only one company that was not going to do that. But that's just something that I think it's good to be aware of, and the discussion surrounding that and kind of both sides. But just speaking of the actors who ended up being in this movie, I think they did a phenomenal job of still being really engaging and interesting and clever while also feeling very real as teenagers or as young people. Or just not necessarily young people, but as people in these certain situations. You're not going to be 100% smooth all the time. And something that I think worked really closely with that was the script and the dialogue, and just I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. And again, kind of going back to what I said earlier about how natural it felt, and yes, there were some hilarious moments, there were some really great lines, but it didn't feel like boom, 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 one joke after another, and just unnatural. It felt like a group of smart and funny people hanging out and sometimes being dorks, and just, it felt so real and so natural. And I think that's one of the reasons that I didn't feel like this movie was overly cheesy. I think the initial setup, when you hear about the premise, you're like, okay, this girl writes love letters that she doesn't intend to send, but they get sent out, and then drama and romance ensue. It can sound very over the top, but actually the way that the premise is laid out, and this goes for the book as well, it kind of actually makes sense. And because I think of the natural acting style and of how well the dialogue flowed, I think that it didn't feel uncomfortably cheesy for me, and that's something that I'm normally really bothered with. I felt like this movie was really charming and heartwarming and sweet, but with a lot of depth, and it didn't ever feel too cheesy or too sugary for me. I also think that the cinematography and just the overall aesthetic of the movie was just so good, so pleasing visually, but also very much in line with Lara Jean and her sense of style. And also the music choices, the soundtrack for this movie, that's not something I tend to pay attention to in films very often, but I noticed it with this one because of how well the songs fit the mood, and even some of the lyrics that they used. It all worked together so cohesively, and it's just it's a very pretty movie to watch, and not in a superficial way. I mean, it always felt like it was furthering the story, but it was just nice to look at in addition to everything else I loved about it. I also think that overall it was a really faithful adaptation of the book, which is really nice and unusual for a book to movie adaptation, as we all know. I think they cut a few things, or they shortened a few things, but for the most part I think it makes sense why they did, and even some of the slight characterization changes they made, I think were kind of in the story's favor. There were multiple characters who I really didn't like in the book. Chris, Lara Jean's best friend, she drove me crazy in the novel, but I actually really enjoyed her in the film. And the same goes for Josh, her next door neighbor and her sister's boyfriend. I really didn't like him in the book. He really rubbed me the wrong way, and I think there were certain things about him that we were supposed to maybe feel not as much of a fan of, but even the times where we're clearly supposed to like him, I didn't really like him for most of the book. I felt like he was just a little too pushy about certain things, but in the movie he was such a sweetheart and a dork, and even though he did still do some of the annoying things, I did like him overall a lot more. And also Margot, I think she had more depth, and I think she was less abrasive I think, and while, you know, that wasn't quite as true to the character as it could have been, I think it made for a more enjoyable, like, sisterly interaction, you know, in the movie. Because the family dynamics is another thing I loved about the novel that I also loved about the movie. It was just so wonderful and heartwarming and complicated and messy and just very real. And also, I loved Peter. I mean, I was one of the people who liked him in the book anyway, even though I know he's a very divisive character, and frankly, I can't really explain why I still liked him in the book, because he's kind of an asshole, but he's still kind of lovable or charming, and I think in the movie they really like softened him, like his characterization up a little bit, where he was much more of a straightforward, like sweet, like romantic lead, and I loved him so much. And even though there were still some moments where you're not sure what to think about him, or if, you know, he reacted in a certain way, I think that overall he was a more appealing character in the movie, especially going off of people's reactions who really didn't like him in the book, and then seeing the movie and seeing how different he is, or how differently they felt about him. I think that was just really well done, and just Peter Kavinsky is just so wonderful. So finally, I want to talk about one of the like underlying themes or messages, or I guess like takeaways that I had from this movie that I also had with reading the books. And I actually talked about this the last time I reviewed one of these books in a wrap-up, and something that was just so important to me about the way that Jenny Han writes is the way that she never downplays her character's problems. Like, she doesn't write about teenagers or young people in a way that makes it feel like, oh, they're so funny and, you know, it's so amusing that they think this is a big deal. I think Jenny Han really writes about these issues and these characters as if, like, yeah, there are some stressful things about high school that suck. Or, like, there are some situations you get into that are just miserable, and yeah, you might get over them later. Like, you might look back and realize that, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought, but she never writes it like she's looking down on them, or like she's trying to get her readers to feel that her characters are overreacting. I don't know if that made any sense, but basically, I think the movie did a fantastic job of that as well, and just really communicating the idea that young people's problems still matter, and that just because you might not always be as affected by something as you are when it first happens, that doesn't mean it's any less important to you, you know, or that it's any less upsetting at the time. And that is just something that I really appreciate, and I think that's one of the fantastic things about these books and about the movie. So bottom line, I clearly recommend this film. I absolutely loved it. I've already watched it twice, and I know that's going to be a much higher number in the future. As far as whether you should read the book first, in general, I feel like it is better to read the book before you watch an adaptation, but I think in this case, it's a little more open-ended. Like, I think you could watch the film and then read the book and still enjoy both of them. I think the movie is just so fantastic and such a good adaptation of the book that I think if you watched it, it wouldn't necessarily put you off reading the book like some really bad film adaptations do. I think that even if you didn't like or didn't love the book, I think that you could still really enjoy the movie because of some of the things I mentioned and like the slight changes they made. I think if you did enjoy the book, you should definitely watch the movie because I think you're going to enjoy both of them. I don't remember the last time I was this excited about a movie, and that's just been wonderful. So highly recommend. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I know that movies are usually rated on a 4-star scale, but I'm using my book rating scale, so whatever. And basically I watched this movie and then I ended up watching Set It Up, which is the Netflix original, and then the next day we ended up seeing Crazy Rich Asians in theaters, which I had been planning to do anyway. Basically this has just reminded me of how much I love rom-coms, which is something I had kind of forgotten because romantic contemporary is not a genre I tend to gravitate towards in books very often, so I think I kind of tend to forget about it, or to forget how much I can love them in movie format. So I'm just so excited about all these amazing romantic comedy movies that are coming out, and just please let me know if you guys have seen this film, what you thought of it, or if you're going to watch it. I love it. I hope a lot of people love it so that we can get the second one adapted and the third one when I finally get around to reading that book. So thank you guys so much for watching this very excitable video. I will see you soon with another one, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!